Okay, so it's time to move on to our second presentation today. Thank you all for being here, and we're looking forward to hearing from our next speaker, who is Dr. Nadiia Honcharenko. Nadiia Honcharenko is Senior Research Fellow in the Department of Cultural Heritage and Research and Preservation of the Institute for Cultural Research of the National Academy of Arts of Ukraine. The areas of her professional interest are cultural studies, history education, and memory policy. She has many recent publications, including Babin Yar Holocaust Memorial Center as Instrument of Propaganda and Russian Hybrid War. That was published in 2021. And she has also published Ukrainian culture in a three-dimensional model: decommunization, decolonization, de-Russification. She has published Causes of the War and Ways of Victory, Decommunization of Space, Decolonization of Culture, De-Russification of Consciousness. And finally, I think most recently, from the Soviet Victory Temple to the Ukrainian Museum of the War for Independence, preservation of the monument and redefinition of symbols in the National Museum of the History of Ukraine in the Second World War. And that was published in May of 2023. So today, Dr. Honcharenko is going to share her research with us on the following topic: the Holodomor in the memory culture in Ukraine, from forced oblivion through individual remembrance to official commemoration. And I'll just mention that Dr. Honcharenko is in the IU Ukraine non-residential program as a continuing scholar, having been a very active participant in the first cohort of the program. So it's so wonderful to have you presenting for us today, Dr. Honcharenko. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, dear Sarah. Thank you so much, colleagues who present here. I'm grateful so much for the Ukraine Non-Residential Scholars Program for the support of my research during this second year, because I have possibility to work in a beautiful library, and it's very, very important thing for me. My topic, I propose this topic because November in Ukraine is the month when we commemorate the victims of Holodomor genocide. And to honor the memory of millions of Ukrainians, I would like to share with you with my paper and my presentation. And now I'm starting to share my screen with you. Do you see my screen?
Yes, looks great.
Okay. I think I would like to share slideshow, maybe full slide. Okay, maybe I will share in this way. Firstly, a brief theoretical part. A famous German cultural anthropologist Aleida Assmann and French sociologist Maurice Halbach conceptualized the two types of the memory culture: communicative memory and cultural memory, which can be mutually opposite or complementary. As you can see on the slide, communicative memory exists over several generations via direct interpersonal exchange, and cultural memory combines the entire existence of the community and requires institution, so-called memory infrastructure, to uphold it. There is different approaches to analyzing the role of the state in the process of preserving, developing, or reshaping the cultural memory through the historical policy. And these different approaches to analyzing, proposed by two famous analysts in Ukraine, Georgy Kasyanov and Alexander Gritsenko. You can see the citation from their definition, and I just would like to comment that Kasyanov's definition can be used while analyzing totalitarian or authoritarian societies in the 20th century. But in case of independent Ukraine, in my opinion, is more appropriate, well-balanced definition proposed by Alexander Gritsenko. Communicative memory define my interest in history and determine my professional choice. My grandmother told me stories about communist and Komsomol's brigades, which took not only the supplies for coming planting season, but everything they wanted: livestock, tools, clothes. They turned every floor, every corner, turned everything upside down, and find where the villagers might have hidden beans, flour, nuts, and even dried apples. They tore the last piece of bread from the hand of even the poorest peasants, and calling them kulaks and justifying their robberies by saying that they were building a happy future. She told me stories about exhausted children and adults swollen up by starvation. Scores of people have succumbed to their hunger, but were left for a long time in their homes or on the roadside because there was no way to bury them. The opposite knowledge was presented in my school history textbooks. It was called difficulties of collectivization. It was said that collectivization was attracted by people's enemies. It eventually succeeded only because the Vice Communist Party overcame them all and saved the peasants from the kulaks as well as the young Soviet state from the nationalists and capitalists. The definition Holodomor is used to encompass the starvation of the peasants as well as a broader assault on the Ukrainian nation, which included an attack on the cultural and religious life in Ukraine. In 1932, high quotas settled for grain which Ukrainian villages had to contribute to the Soviet state. Authorities intensified the acquisition campaign and confiscated all food. A special law was introduced that made the theft of even a few stalks of grain an act of sabotage, punishable by execution. On this slide, you can see the map of different regions in Ukraine where people were starved from the Holodomor. This map was prepared by Harvard Institute of Ukrainian Studies. I can advise you to visit this site because in this place they contain very different kind of map concerning Ukrainians' history, concerning political elections, and so many interesting topics. The academic studies of specific historical phenomenon, the 1933 Holodomor, is related to its absence or presence in cultural memory of the society because the Soviet totalitarian regime, especially during Soviet time, made the constant systematic efforts which are aimed, on the one hand, at destroying of cultural memory of society and suppressing the communicative memory of all the people who live in the former USSR, and on the other hand, and actively shaping the new version of their past and images of their future. As a result, family memoirs of collectivization, the Holodomor, and the repression in the 1930s was forbidden and turned out into the dangerous knowledge for descendants. A deep gap was created between the only correct official version of the past and the real traumatic experience of millions of people, which began to be bridged only with the collapse of the Soviet regime. This gap has had the significant and very different effects on millions of people. For some, it has created the alienation and distrust in any government in general. For others, a conformist perception of the official version for the sake of peace. And for a small numbers, for example, writers, or dissidents, the need not only to remember the victims, but as well to tell about them to people. Under Stalinism, it was not only forbidden to talk about famine, it was even forbidden to record the deaths caused by it. I quote, "It is prohibited for any organization except the Joint State Political Directorate to register the case of swelling and death from starvation." End of quote. The information about famine was leaking out to other countries. So, in order not to lose out on export opportunities and to promote the creation of a new civilization, the party leadership denied that the famine existed. Instead, they invited the foreigners who were fascinated by social experiments to come and to see for themselves that there was no famine. Henri Barbusse, Walter Duranty, Edouard Herriot, Bernard Shaw, and many others did not see the famine because they were, I quote, well fed. However, it was not only through the publication of journalists such Gareth Jones, but also through the letters of diplomats like Italian or German diplomats and Ukrainians who managed to escape from a social camp like Viktor Kravchenko that the information about horror or the famine spread outside the USSR. It's impossible to understand the impact of Holodomor on modern society if we limit ourselves to establishment and explanation of the fact through analysis of sources and official documents of that era that are familiar to historians. There are several factors for this. Firstly, many documents of the totalitarian era had a so-called double bottom. They distorted the reality through its denial or invention of the facts, so-called facts, and some sources were destroyed. Secondly, historical work with the documents that have been preserved became possible only after the censorship was lifted and the access to archives was opened. Third, the analysis of official documents should be complemented by the study of oral history sources collected from living participants and witnesses. This became possible only after restoration of independence and free development of various research methods and approaches. Understanding this trauma, its role in political processes, worldviews, and cultural practices, and overcoming its consequences has become a serious challenge since Ukraine regained its independence for scholars, for the state's memory policy, and for millions of Ukrainians. It's interesting that idea of blaming Ukrainian nationalists, as we can see on this citation on this slide, and idea of blaming Ukrainian nationalists and distracting from the genocide by mixing World War II and the Holodomor was invented by the KGB in Soviet times. It was a reaction to evidence from witnesses which have been gathering in the USA and Canada, as well as the commemoration of Holodomor by Ukrainian diaspora. This idea is still alive and actively used by modern Russian or pro-Russian propaganda. Kind of soft reinterpretation of this concept developed by some Ukrainian or European historians in statement that so-called canonical version of the Holodomor was imposed by the Ukrainian diaspora in the early 90s and has been dominating all Ukrainian historians and preventing them from openly debating various questions. In my opinion, it is a significant exaggeration. Why is it? Why is it exaggeration? Because of tragic experience of millions of people, which opened it on public since USSR has started to decline. Despite the communicative memory of what happened was transmitted only through family interaction, as well as feeling of shame and guilt accompanied these stories, this process also has a therapeutical healing effect. It influences on establishment of numerous civil society and scholarly organizations in Ukraine, which started not only to collect and publish testimonies, but also install in some regions, even in confrontation with local authorities, the places of memory of Holodomor victims. Over the past 30 years, the Holodomor has become one of the topics most actively studied by Ukrainian scholars. When the archives were opened after 1991, the scholars could see that famine in Ukraine was neither just a way to pump out the bread for export use, nor just an instrument of public terror and intimidation. The famine became an instrument of national policy designed to put an end to Ukrainization, to destroy all those who sought to preserve the national identity within the context of Soviet so-called friendship of nations. The anti-Ukrainian direction of the famine is evident because under the slogan to destroy the nationalist counter-revolution were carried out the mass murder of peasants, the mass repression of intellectuals, and the punishment of local party members who dared to report on the famine to Moscow. Besides the collectivization process that caused the Holodomor, scholars analyze the communist regime in general as criminal and inhuman. They review the comprehensive and widespread state violence and assess the Soviet regime as totalitarian and occupying, where mass crimes were not only tools, but one of the core elements. Some researchers, you can see the title of their article on this slide. Some researchers concentrate on the role of different instigators and perpetrators of the Holodomor, who willingly or under pressure took part in violent Soviet practices. The local authorities, the poorest peasants, and young urban activists. Others analyze the memory policy in the USSR and Ukraine regarding the Holodomor and recognize the marginal status of publication about the Holodomor as genocide in respectable journals. You can see the citation from such definition on this slide. During the last few years, the already very heated debates on the issue of demographic losses as a result of the Holodomor have intensified even more. Most of the respectable researchers put the number of victims 3.9 million, but some points to an amount close to 9 or even 10 million. What is important? It's important to note that there is still a professional discussions about the number of Holodomor victims, even if in the face of a war that threatens the existence of Ukrainian historians and demographers. The Holodomor was denied by the Soviet authorities until the late 1980s. The collection and publication of testimonies began within the context of perestroika and glasnost, but was not officially supported. However, the public demand was so great that in 1990, the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Ukraine adopted the resolution on the famine of 1932-1933 in Ukraine and the publication of related archival materials, which acknowledged the fact of the mass famine and even named their perpetrators, as you can see on this slide from citation from this document. During the 90s and early 2000s, the dehumanization of Ukrainian culture unfolded in Ukraine. No more forbidden works, names, or historical events. However, political power remained in the hand of the former Soviet Ukrainian elites, who did not support the official condemnation of Soviet totalitarian regime. During the presidencies of Leonid Kravchuk and Leonid Kuchma, most of the Ukrainian members of parliament, along with many academicians and part of the educational and cultural establishment, remained supporters of the Soviet narrative of Ukrainian history. They opposed the adoption of the new laws and commemoration practices. Some members of parliament fiercely resisted changes in history education concerning the topic of World War II and Holodomor. They demanded President and Parliament, I quote, to stop the distortion of historical truth about our glorious past. But Kuchma took a neutral position. State did not finance any research project, but did not prevent private sponsors and charitable foundations from doing so. Scholars and civil society activists offered initiatives to the authorities on the state memory policy of the Holodomor. This included study of archival documents from the 20s and 30s, publication of archival documents as well as new researches, establish the Holodomor Research Institute to compile a list of monuments to the Holodomor victims erected by local residents and take them under state protection, and to create a national Holodomor Memorial Museum. In 2002, it was year of parliamentary election. In his decree, Kuchma announced to erect monuments, memorials, and to organize memorial sites in settlements affected by the Holodomor and excavation of archival documents. He also ordered the building of a memorial of the victims of Holodomor and political repression in Kyiv. He ordered the development of a set of measures that the international community would recognize the Holodomor as one of the greatest tragedies in the history of mankind, but he did not use the definition genocide. Viktor Yushchenko showed great interest in the issue and had actively participated in all parliamentary hearings regarding this topic when he was member of parliament prior to his presidency. He also perceived the commemoration of the Holodomor victims as one of the important tasks of the state cultural policy, rather than a temporary use of the issue in electoral politics. Under Yushchenko presidency, more systematic steps were taken to decommunize the public space, including the dismantling the monuments to organizers of the Holodomor. He noted that the presence of these monuments in the public space made it impossible to honor the memory of the victims. Yushchenko viewed academic research, historical education, and museum practices as important elements of the cultural infrastructure that should be involved in understanding the past and condemning the crime of the communist regime. During his presidency, archival materials related to the Holodomor for representatives of NGO, academic institutions, and independent scholars were made more accessible. The all-Ukrainian national project called the National Book of Memory, in cooperation of regional authorities with local activists, researchers, and civil society organizations, compiled lists of Holodomor victims in Ukraine, creating both an edition on the national level as well as regional books of memory, 20 volumes in total. Almost all regional volumes were completed by the end of 2008. Now we can understand the special value of these books containing documents from the Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast as from the regional archives, because these archives were destroyed or looted after the Russian occupation in 2014. Yushchenko made permanent attempts to international recognition of the Holodomor as genocide. 10 countries during his presidency, Lithuania, Latvia, Georgia, Poland, Peru, Paraguay, Ecuador, Colombia, Mexico, and even Ukraine recognized Holodomor as genocide. Another important project of Yushchenko time is constructing of Holodomor Memorial. It was the realization of Kuchma's initiative, but at another location. However, even Yushchenko's plan was only partially implemented due to lack of funds and opposition from political opponents. So far, only the one part of the memorial has been built and it's functioning, the Holodomor Genocide Museum in the Park of Glory in Kyiv. Discussion about the museum, the problem of its construction, the symbolism and content of the exhibition have been going on since the very beginning of its construction. In many works that analyze Yushchenko memory policy, the Holodomor is interpreted as the main topic, even though it is the subject of only 1/10 among all his decrees. Why is there such an impression and criticism, which is often unjustified, about the dominance of the Holodomor in his policy? I think there are several reasons. The main one is the size of the target groups of the Holodomor policy and its large territorial coverage. All other anniversaries and commemoration took place mainly in the capital and in one or two other cities or regions. But the Holodomor commemoration was in 18 regions of Ukraine, so the commemoration covered all these regions. The remembrance of the Holodomor was only in communicative memory. However, due to the public policy, it's becoming a cultural memory of millions of contemporary Ukrainians. Another reason is that all branches of power in Ukraine, the president, the parliament, government, and the court of appeal, and Ukraine diplomatic missions abroad, and entire branch, academic institution, and numerous civil society organizations in Ukraine were actively involved into shaping and implementing the Holodomor's policy. It is unprecedented for Ukraine to have such wide range of actors in public memory policy. Yanukovych, as president, immediately showed his attitude to the Holodomor. After his inauguration, the page with materials about the Holodomor disappeared from the official website of the president. The Russian delegation on the session of the Council of Europe on April 27, 2010, was fully satisfied on his statement. Here you can see a quote of his statement on the slide, and greeted Yanukovych's speech with prolonged applauses. Yanukovych's attitude are explained not only by his love to Russia, but also by the absence of a moral barrier, as some scholars think. This allowed his associates to describe the stories about the Holodomor in school textbooks published during the Yushchenko era as nonsense and mudslinging at Soviet modernization. Moreover, then Minister of Education Dmytro Tabachnik, now he works in Zaporizhia occupied authorities, stated that textbooks should be cleared of the crazy exaggeration of the Holodomor topic. Attempts of Yanukovych to return Ukraine into the zone of Russian influence ended in his defeat and flight. The new Russian war reinforced Ukrainian perception of genocidal nature of anti-Ukrainian Russian policy. President Poroshenko took part in all the commemorative events and made strong statements to Ukrainian and international audience, calling on other countries to recognize the Holodomor as genocide. According to the communization laws, not only particular crimes of Soviet period were condemned, but the entire communist regime was evaluated as criminal. This is reflected in the practices of the state institutions, in educational programs, in textbooks of history, and in different museum exhibitions. The Holodomor was still to be discussed, but World War II became more important since 2014, not least because of the key role the mythology around the Great Patriotic War plays in the justification of the Russian aggression. The annexation of Crimea, the Russian aggression in eastern Ukraine, as well as spread of information about the tragedy, about the Holodomor tragedy, influenced a lot on public support for the recognition of the Holodomor as genocide. Volodymyr Zelensky, who was elected in 2019, initially very harshly criticized the restriction imposed during Poroshenko's presidency on Russian books and Russian films that spread military propaganda or created by individuals who violated the Ukrainian laws. He was also very skeptical about the activities of the Institute of National Memory and showed little interest in strongly debated topics such as World War II or Holodomor. However, he proposed measures like those set by the previous presidents for commemorating the Holodomor victims. In the mentioned decree, he also plans to fulfill some of the tasks set by previous presidents. By calling for the lighting of the candle of remembrance in November 2021, he stated that having lost millions of lives in the last century, Ukraine proved that we are the nation that cannot be conquered even by total famine. Zelensky's approach on the Holodomor was fully in line with the one that was initiated by previous presidents. But the Russian full-scale aggression in 2022 turned him to make even stronger statements on the importance of history and significance of memory policy in contemporary society. Over the 30 years of post-communist transformation, the communicative memory of millions of Ukrainians of the Holodomor has gone beyond family remembrance. Together with the newly declassified archival documents, it has become the subject of vast academic research and analysis, historical education, museum exhibitions, commemorative practices, and finally, an important part of state memory policy. Summarizing the memory policy on the Holodomor, presidential activities, institutional infrastructure, civil society organization, we can see how the need of the Ukrainian society to understand its traumatic past grew, how this affected not only the understanding of history today, but also the struggle to preserve our national identity. The disclosure of information about Holodomor and the commemoration of the famine had a great impact on the deconstruction of the Soviet mythology about the history of the 20th century. Myths about the modern, successful Soviet state where brotherhood of nations and social justice flourished. The commemoration of victims became an important element of contemporary Ukrainian identity. This is why the recognition of the Holodomor as genocide by other countries in 2022-2023 demonstrates empathy for the victims of the past and support for Ukrainians and awareness of the tragedy that is unfolding today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Honcharenko, for this sobering but so important presentation. I'm sure that we have questions and comments from our colleagues, so I invite you to raise your hands and offer your feedback or your questions for Dr. Honcharenko. Well, while folks are warming up, I'll take the moderator's privilege to begin, if that's okay. You mentioned that November is Holodomor commemoration kind of month in Ukraine. I wonder if you could speak about how the work that you're doing is informing any public kind of events or commemorations that might be planned either in Kyiv, where you're located, or other locations in Ukraine. I'm kind of wondering about the marriage of scholarship and public intellectual work, what that looks like in your case.
Okay, thank you very much for the questions. This last Saturday of November is usually it's a commemorative day, and every day, every year, until this full-scale invasion and until this special law about wartime, many different events organized all over Ukraine. And for example, in this National Museum of Holodomor genocide, they every year they organized very a different kind of events, and even this year they announced a week ago they announced that November museum will work every day without any weekends, without any holidays. And they organize lectures, excursions, and explanations of different documents. But of course, their activity must be quickly ended up in case of sirens, air defense sirens. So many activities during last year or this year just transmitted on online on this museum and other museums. And also on Saturday every year on this day of commemoration, this candle about around 4 p.m. Every family called to light this candle of remembrance and put it on the window just to remember the victim of Holodomor. This kind of remembrance was organized during Yushchenko presidency, and it was initiative by James Mays when he worked in Ukraine. He did he did a very big amount of works and activities for remembering the Holodomor victims. And it also was his proposal to light the candle of remembering. And every year I'm looking through the window and I'm observing how many people lighten this candle, and I must admit that last year, I don't know how it will go this year, but in 2022 it was much more than every previous year. So I guess it's really this full-scale invasion and this type of contemporary genocide committed by Russian military. It helps, only this helps many people to realize that such events was held 90 years ago, and to understand, and helps them to understand how they what they must know and how they can preserve this memory.
Thank you. Yes, Yulia Kornichuk, please.
Thank you for your presentation. My question would probably be a kind of not exactly out of subject, but in a more it's related, but I'm afraid that it will be not exactly on your presentation. But, it is about this official commemoration, because it has a flip side. So when the memory is live, when it's individual remembrance, there is a certain attachment to it. And when you introduce this official commemoration, it becomes a kind of distanced ritual, so to speak. And the last year we had not only many candles in the windows, we had this big scandal with Holodomor and basically disrespecting of this memory. So what can we do to, to prevent this backfiring of this official remembrance?
It's a difficult question. Thank you for this difficult questions and very deep. I think it's as for me, this official kind of events or official memory, it's not contradict my individual approach to this. But I understand that many young people maybe not so. Maybe do not have such empathy and such understanding which need in such a topic, in such issue, and I think only education, only historical education, only family education can in some way prevent, but on the other hand, I think it's impossible for us to prevent all this ugly activity, because they exist not only regarding the topic on Holodomor, they exist regarding other very deep and painful topics. So I think it's impossible to prevent them all, but I think we must to explain many problems of it. I remember when our member of parliament, one of the leader of, she was a leader and she is a leader, Yulia Tymoshenko, when she exploited this term тарифний геноцид, when she explained the growing of prices for householding. I think it's kind of such an ugly comparison, which we don't. I think such comparison cannot exist in public space, but it exists, and even some member of parliaments, or even some public intellectuals, or even some very smart people used such ugly comparison. I can recall you the joke made by head of art house traffic, this very nice company who show us this European cinema, Denis Ivanov. In 2014, when he read the concept of humanitarian policy in Ukraine, he told on public, how long can we talk about these problems? Shall all of us to be such Holodomorci? It was like irony, like jokes. So it's impossible to talk about this problem in such way, but nothing else, just explanation and just dissemination of knowledge can prevent us of such things.
Sergei Pahomenko, please.
Thank you, dear Nadiia. Thank you for your presentation. And I have not something like question, but remark. I think that artificial increase of the number of Holodomor's victims causes to devaluation of this tragic, unique historical phenomenon. Sadly, we can observe as some our politicians, opinion makers, and even scientists ignore objective, real historical facts and documents and try to exaggerate, increase the number of victims. Maybe you know who I mean. This is the former head of Holodomor Museum and scandal with her PhD. And I guess that during wartime, this radicalization of Ukrainian national narrative and Ukrainian collective trauma can be justified. But after the war, Ukrainian historian science have to cope with this problem. So it was just remark.
Thank you, Sergey. It's important remark. I agree with you. I totally agree with you with such exaggeration can impact, can influence more damage for Ukraine than helps to understand this tragedy and this issue. But as you know, so many Ukrainian historians are very critical to such opinion, and there is many discussion about it at many famous historians from Institute of History of Ukraine and from different institutions. They are debated, and as far as I know, Lesia Stasiuk, who you mentioned, former director of Memorial of Museum of Holodomor, she is suspended from her position, and she is struggling to back, but I think it's impossible. And I guess Ukrainian society, especially academician circles, very healthy, despite of all our problems and all our struggle with many problems. So I guess after we will wait for our victory. I hope it will come for us. I'm very hopeful of it, but all depends on our military by now. And then I guess that this line of exaggeration and radicalization could not prevail. I think it's a more healthy line, more respectable academicians will prevail, and maybe on those time we will some new documents will open it up, and we will be acknowledge some new facts, and then maybe we can recount some numbers. But for now, it's just about the debates and arguments, and I hope it will be in a good way, this debates. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadiia. Maria Rohoja, please.
Thank you for your presentation, and I think there is no family without Holocaust trauma in central Ukraine, especially in central Ukraine. And such trauma was existed through family stories that was transmitted from generation to generation. In our family, grandparents told about great famine. And you, at the beginning of your presentation, you have mentioned Aleida Osman. And Aleida Osman used the Kozelek's concepts of track and trace. And track is in her understanding, track is personal experience of great trauma, and trace is a common road for collective memories far from this immediate experience. And what do you think, how to balance these local family memories as track, even several generations later, when grandparents died and nobody can tell us immediate experience about this terrible phenomena, and official, sometimes pompous commemorations where immediate memory is blurred. How to balance these two approaches to Holocaust or to Holodomor?
Do you mean balance? What do you mean on balance? Balance on the personal perceptions or official policy?
Balance between personal local stories and official commemorations, as it is, this balance is necessary to transmit this memory for future generations of Ukrainians. Without these immediate stories, family stories, because people are dying, and only pompous official commemorations still exist.
This concept of cultural memory gives us an answer, because it's a memory about not personal transmission, but transmission through the books, research, films, programs, through the commemoration practices. And I think that problem of balance, it's individual problems for every person. As for me personally, I can ask about, I can answer for myself. As for me personally, I got this balance. So I feel it. I have a personal trace. I have a communicative memory from my grandmother, and also I am deeply involved, and I am analyze this so-called official, these tracks of collective memory or cultural memory. Of course, sometimes we can observe some exaggeration or some aesthetic nuances which we don't like. But it can be in every topic, in every issue of humanitarian space. So I think it's a personal attitude, personal approach of every generation, every individuals to just to look for such balance and to find it. And maybe someone can't find it, but I don't know. I have not. I must admit that I have not plain answer for this question.
Aleida Osman stresses that these commemorations, official commemorations, they blur the immediate experience, and it becomes a trace, a wide road for memories without this personal experience. And she considers that some political policy making is necessary to take in tonus this experience for future generations, because with the passage of time this experience diminishes, so the mode of this experience becomes different, and it's necessary. It's not personal strategies. It's not a personal affair. It's a political question, as she considers.
It's not also.
She mentions Holocaust, really, not Holodomor.
Yes, I know this work. Yes, I think it's as for me, it's no contradiction between these two lines.
No, it's not about contradiction, but it's different approaches, different understanding, and different content of the memories.
For me, yes, but because one memory is communicative, is individual, which transmitted from generation to generation, and other one is transmitted by cultural infrastructure, by this infrastructure of memory. And I think that they are not differ our perception of past. I think they are combined our perception. They just help each other to exist, and we learn about events of 100 years ago, or about history, for example, early modern European history. Yes, we can learn and we can feel some sympathy or negative feeling regarding some actors in 17th century due to cultural memory, or first of all due to history, professional history works. But how many people read the professional historiography? Not so much. But most of people knew about something what existed in 17 or 10th, or even much deeper, through to the some kind of historical education, cultural memory. So it combined, and I think it's a way of it's a normal way of life to be interested in many various events from past. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nadiia, for your wonderful presentation, which sparked lots of interesting and important, and as you said, very deep questions about historical memory. Really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us today. Unfortunately, it's time to close our seminars for November, but I'll remind you that we will gather once again in December for further research seminars. We are still actually looking for a presenter for, let me get the date right. So I'll stop recording.